Hi, I am Jude. Welcome to my Java programming course. In this lesson, we are going to learn everything about classes and objects in Java programming language. This video is part of a complete Java course I have published on YouTube. If you are interested in becoming a Java expert, I would highly encourage you to check out the rest of the videos as well. If this is your first time here, I am Jude Niroshan, a passionate technology enthusiast and an Oracle Certified Associate Professional in Java. This course is designed for anyone who is eager to learn programming, and I am committed to guiding you every step of the way until you expertise in Java. I would love to connect with you on social media and welcome your feedback and insights. Thank you. In the last two videos, I tried my best to explain to you what is data and how data is being represented in Java programs using variables. Furthermore, I tried also to explain what is behavior or actions and how it is being programmed using methods. Now, with those two foundational knowledge, I want to explain to you what is an entity. When we are writing or developing software, we are always trying to provide a solution to a real world problem. In that case, we want to have or we want to simulate the real world scenario inside our software applications. And that's where the entities comes into play. When we talk about a software, we can identify key stakeholders inside the software. Let's imagine as an engineer, you are going to develop a software application for a library system. During the design phase, you need to identify the entities in this software application. That's where you can come across entities like listed below: book, author, student, and so on. These are real world entities that you can interact or that you can represent inside your software solution. Well, we can also say anything we see in our world can be considered as an object, because we can identify two things in any object. They are features and behaviors. For example, let's take this particular taxi car. It has features and also it has set of behaviors. We can also call features as characteristics. Basically, they are describing the object, the nature of the object itself. And the behaviors define what it can do. As a conclusion, we can say an entity is made out of variables and methods. I hope now you understand how data and methods combine together and build an entity. We cannot create any program in Java without creating a class file. But what is a class actually? As I explained to you what is an entity, now entity is being translated into a class file in Java. So if you want to represent an entity, what you must create is a class. We sometimes also use the name attributes to refer the variables inside a class. Class is more like a blueprint. It helps us to create objects with different characteristics and behaviors into those objects. Here is another way to understand what are Java classes. In this slide, I have included a photo of a machine which you can create fish cookies. So this machine can create multiple fish cookies. But do you really need more than one machine? No, you can have a single machine but create multiple fish cookies. Also note, all the fish cookies that you created out of that machine will look like the same, which means the fish cookies are identical to each another. So this is the same scenario when it comes to the class and the object. So this student class is more like this machine in this story. You can use this student class to create objects. So the objects will look like the same and you can create as much as you want in your application. Please note, all the objects that you create out of a class will have the same number of attributes and the methods that you defined in your class file. So class file is more like this machine where it has this particular design and the styling into that particular fish cookie. And that will be reflected in that fish cookie that you created out of that machine. So similarly, all the attributes and behaviors you write inside the class file will be reflected inside all the objects that you get created from that class. One more thing I want to highlight, when you are writing Java class files, think like an architect. Think about the users who will use this particular class to generate or create objects from that class. And also have an idea about object nature, the attributes that it needs to have and the behaviors those objects needs to be able to perform. Now, how do we create objects using class files? So there is a special keyword in Java called new in all simple letters. This new keyword is a reserved keyword in Java which can create objects out of a class. When you create objects, it has all the attributes and behaviors or methods defined in that class. You can create as many objects as you want in your application. So for example, here I have represented how to create an object using a student class. Just like how we created variables, we can create variable types for objects. It is the similar pattern or the similar structure what we have followed. Starting with the type, in this case the data type, it's the class name. And the name for a variable, in this case you can provide any name, and followed by the equal sign, which is the assignment operator. And on the right hand side to the assignment operator, you have the value. In this case, what you have, it's an object. The new keyword creates an object out of student class. And at the end, to denote the end of the statement, I use the semicolon. Let's create a class file and then create objects from that class file. So I am going to create a new file in my documents folder called student.java. I am going to start that name with a capital S because it is a class name and I must start with a capital letter or uppercase letter. We can use this reserved keyword called class in Java to create classes. After the class, you need to provide the class name. Here again, when you are providing a name for your class name, make sure to start with a capital letter. In this case, we are going to create a student class. Therefore, I am going to provide the name also as student. After the class name, I am going to have the class scope, which is denoted by opening and closing curly braces. In between these two curly braces, you write the content or the body of your class. I am going to write 3 variables, or in this case, attributes in this student class. For now, let's say every student has an ID and a height and a weight. I'm going to use the int type as the variable type, and then I need to provide the variable name. In this case, student number. We as Java developers needs to remember whenever we are creating variables, start with a lowercase English letter. But when we are creating classes, we must start with a capital letter. So that's why when I wrote the student, I started with a capital S. But when I write the student number, the variable name, I started with a lowercase letter. I will provide the student number as 1 for now. Then I need to provide the semicolon. That's the end of a statement. Then I will write the second attribute as double type because height can be with the centimeters. It can have some decimal points as well. The third variable also I'll use double, which is weight. We are going to have these 3 attributes for every student in our classroom. Then I'm going to create another new file called application to run this application. I'm going to call this file as application.java. Make sure to start with a capital letter whenever you are creating Java files. Now, inside the application.java, I'm going to create a class called application. There is a link between the file name and the class name that you provide inside that same file name. For example, I cannot use a different class name inside this application.java file. This is wrong because I must have a class definition inside my application.java by the name of application. Therefore, I will rename it to application. Then I'm going to start the class scope, which is denoted by the opening and closing curly braces. The main function is the entry point to any Java application. Without this particular Java function, you cannot start any Java program. For now, just type the exact content what I'm writing in this file. Here is my documents folder. As you can see, the two files that we have created so far. Application.java is basically to start this particular program. Student.java is basically to experiment and understand how classes and how to create objects in this scenario. I have opened a new terminal in the documents directory. As you can see, there is this bytecode file generated with that javac command. As you can see, there is this generated bytecode file. As I explained to you earlier, this will create a new object. But the problem is we cannot refer to that object if we do not assign that to a variable. It's the same case if we have any expression like so. 1 plus 2, with this statement will be executed, but we cannot access the result because we did not assign it to a variable. If we want to assign it to a variable, what we need to do is start with the data type and then provide the variable name, and then we can assign this particular expression value. In this case, what we get is an student object. Therefore, we cannot assign this student object into any of the existing or non-primitive data types. That's why we need to use the type as the class name. In this case, I will use the data type as student. Now I need to provide a variable name. In this case, I will say S1 for short. Now we can also access the attributes or the variables created in that particular object. We can do so with the dot operator. S1, we provide the variable name, and then we say dot operator. It is the full stop sign or the dot sign. Inside the student class, we have these three variables defined: student number, height, and weight. Let's print this value into our terminal, just like what we did on line number 4. And then copy and paste this particular value here inside the brackets. I will remove this section because we will not see the value even though we can access it inside that object. Let's observe the output by running the program. But before that, we want to save and compile our application.java file. Here you can see the output has been printed. This is the variable value which was defined inside that class. Basically, we created a new class and then we created a new object and assigned it to a variable called S1. And then through that variable, we were able to access the attribute that was initialized into that object. Let's go ahead and see what is the value we receive when we simply try to print the entire object into the terminal or the command prompt. We can see a hash code value being printed into the terminal. This is the unique identification for this particular object. If we try to create another object, we will get another unique hash code value for that object. This is the first object and this is the second student object. When you create objects in Java, you must grab tied to it. Otherwise, it will be deleted by the garbage collector in the JVM. Garbage collector is a program that is always running in the JVM, and it looks for any objects that has been created and living in the JVM memory. If it sees any object that doesn't have any reference and just hanging around, it will just collect it and delete it. So when you create a new object, you must take the memory address and take a reference into your program. So for example, here I have shown you a reference of type student. I call it as single letter S, okay? And then I will have an object reference. In this case, is a memory address that will be allocated. To clarify this concept more clearly, let's imagine a reference is more like this remote. A remote can be able to control a TV or a remote or a monitor. So in this case, this is not the TV. This is just a remote. This is the reference that I can control, that I can change TV channels. I can watch Netflix or anything in the TV, but I can control everything from this from this remote. So this is the same concept when it comes to references. So my dear students, all the variables in Java can be categorized into two different kinds or two different categories. They are basically the primitive variable types and the custom data types. Primitive data types are the 8 different types that we learned in the third lesson in this course. And now we are going to learn the other category, which is the custom data type, and we call it as a reference in that variable. We don't simply call a variable, we call this special English word called reference. So whenever we have a variable that is pointing to an object, we can also call it as it is a reference to that object. Object has a life cycle. They born, they live, and they die. Okay. So when we ask Java to create an object from a class, what Java do is Java initialize or Java construct that object through a special sequence. So we call it as initializing phase. Once the object has been initialized, Java will return back to us and saying, okay, your object has been initialized. Here is the reference to that object. So Java will not give you the object. Instead, Java will give you a reference to that object. Then we need to have a reference type variable, like in this case, the remote, to store that reference into that remote. In this case, that reference value, the memory address of that object. When we have that reference, we refer to the object, we can control that object through this reference. Basically, we can access attributes, we can call methods in that object, and so on. In that phase, we call it as it's the living state. Once we decided, okay, we are done with that object, we no longer need that object, what we do is we cut off the connection from the remote to the object. Basically, we remove the memory address or the reference into that object. Once that happens, the garbage collector who is always watching the objects will see that object and grab it and delete it. When you ask Java to create an object from a class file, what it does, it executes a constructor in that class file. What is a constructor? Constructor is basically like a method that matches the same name as the class name, but it does not have a return type. For example, in this book class, I wrote a constructor. Note that there is no return type in that method, and it also have the same name as the class name, starts with a capital or uppercase letter. If you recall the student example that we did few minutes ago, we did not write a constructor, but we were able to create objects from the student class. That is with the help of automatically injected default constructor by the Java language. Also note the new keyword that we use to create objects that actually refers to a constructor in that class file. In that case, what we used was the default automatically generated constructor inside the student class. The English keyword this is a reserved keyword in Java. This keyword is used to represent the current object. Also note, if you have written any constructor in a class file, that class file will not get a default constructor injected into that class. Which means whenever you are creating objects out of that class, you must refer those available constructors. In this example, the book, I must use the custom constructor which only accepts a double value. Inside the constructor implementation, you can see that this keyword has been used to refer the current object and its variable called price. When it comes to Java classes, you can extend or inherit from another Java class. In this case, it is more like parent and child relationship. Child class will receive all the attributes and behaviors which are defined inside the parent class. And also the child class can define its own behaviors and attributes. For example, let's imagine we have an animal class and it has been extended by the dog, cat, and lion classes. Naturally, all the attributes and behaviors defined for the animal class will be reflected on all these three classes which has been extended from that parent class. We have a special keyword in Java to denote a class is being inherited from another class. In this case, I have shown you the cat class extends from the animal class. Extends is a reserved keyword in Java. We can also call this scenario cat is also an animal, which means cat can behave exactly as an animal. We can also call this relationship as a is a relationship. In Java, object class is a unique Java class. Any class that you create in Java will automatically extend it from the object class. It can be direct or the indirect path. So we can say that object class is the root class in Java. Alright my dear students, as we have came to the end of this video, I want to summarize what we have learned together. In this video, we learned about entities in general programming. And we also know how to translate an entity into a class file in Java. More importantly, you understand what is the difference between a class and an object in Java. Also, I explained if there is an object without any references, that will be deleted automatically by the garbage collector inside the JVM. You also understand what are constructors and the default constructor that automatically injected by Java. You also know how to represent parent-child relationship between objects using classes. Also, you understand that there is a special class called object in Java, which all the classes automatically extended from. I know this was kind of like a bit lengthy video, but I wanted to take the time and explain the concepts clearly to you. This is the most important video in this entire Java course. If you have any doubts or unclear areas, please rewatch this video, and if it didn't help you, you can leave a comment or reach out to me. I also want to appreciate your dedication, effort, and time you have invested into this course. You are doing a really good job. So with that momentum, I would invite you to join with me our next video where we are going to learn about permissions and how to write secure Java applications.